Okay, well, I start to kick this off, and everybody's attention. A beautiful day, we'll get through this, everybody can get out in the afternoon and do what everybody likes to do around here. I'm going to introduce our consultant team first. You not here? Can you hear now? Here we go, I'll put it in my mouth, here we go. I'm Bob Metcalf with Mitchell Associates. We're the prime consultant on the project, and we have Cole Palmer, Des Moines Associates, and Principal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have members of team to introduce themselves as soon as I can find them. Brayden?
I am Greg Driver with Mitchell Associates.
Christy Mateo?
Christy Mateo, Paul Palmer.
Bill Haskell?
Bill Haskell, Paul Palmer.
Is this Carol or something? There you are. It's dark back there. And Kara from Principal, Russ from Principal, and Julia from our office. Oh, she's now back in. She was the one signing everybody in this morning. So I want to welcome everybody to this wonderful opportunity for the community to put their input into how these 7 acre parcel the town has acquired to be utilized to meet the needs and the goals of the community in terms of what sort of vision you see to happen here. So what I'm going to do is I'll give just a brief, this session, we're intending to be able to have your insight, see what's going on in the property, having some visioning, and the rest is going to be going through that in more detail. What I need is one of those mics that puts on your cheek. Anyway, so that you can, it'll give you a guide through how we're going to proceed with the actual work that is one of the days. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through right now where we've started on this and a little bit about the property, and then I'll turn it over to Russ, and we'll get going. So as we call this the Kennebunkport Village tomorrow. So, again, this is the parcel, the 6.67 acres. It has the frontage on North Street, we have frontage on School Street. Walking through this, the blue that you're seeing here are the defined wetlands that are on the parcel itself. There are 2 stream segments. There's one here that runs down to this location, another segment here that ties in, and they all flow down and go under North Street. There are also several significant rural pools that are located on the site that have regulatory setback requirements. These are in fact at this location here. There are 2 of them here, and then there's another significant one up in this location here. And then across this section of the property, there's a 135-foot wide CMP utility corridor that divides the site into 2 sections. It's about 1,300 feet back from North Street. The utilities for the project that was originally proposed on here, sewer and water were extended and stubbed into the site on this location here, and they would be extended all the way through the property. The dashed line that you can see in here is the rough end line of the road. You see that the rough end road you see out there now, and that follows in alignment. It was associated with setback requirements from the stream by the shoreline zoning regulations on this end here. And then where it crossed over the CMP easement, that was pretty much directed by CMP in terms of where that crossing could occur. And then this was just navigated through and occurred linear. And then this one followed along what had been a road that had been constructed into about this point here years ago by a prior landowner. So that's a little bit of an overview of the parcel itself. As you can see, all the black dots on here that you're looking at, those are existing buildings and residents that surround the property. You can see the visual context of how close it is to the Dock Square area. The density that you're looking at in terms of what the existing village area looks like. And then you have, this is Foxbury Woods on the outer edge over here. This is Bishop Woods over here. This is the new Wallace Woods that was recently constructed. We're sitting in here right now at the Consolidated school location. The input so far, what we've done, we've had a series of stakeholder meetings with the steering committee. We had a crowdsourcing meeting in which we had the introduction of the project to the public and get some initial input. Some of the images as you're looking here on the wall, on the tables up here, we have the folks do that very first night, putting their preferences of things that they like or didn't like, which is, for those of you who have already done it, and those of you who haven't, you'll get an opportunity to do that. And these are some of the images that we've already looked at this morning. And some of the likes and dislikes. There's always a lot of dislike here. And then at the end of that session, we asked several questions. What uses we'd like to see on the property, and we got a very good array of discussion on this, and there's a lot of consistency in terms of some of the types of uses, so we'll see where that goes in today's session as well. And then the other question was, what would make the project successful? Working on taking these and trying to assemble those in terms of the percentage of what everybody is looking at, and based on the additional information we take away from today, we'll be updating all that so we final more of those documents that we put together at the end. So the possibilities, and I'm going to turn this over to Russ, where he'll take over. Thanks, Bob.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Russ Preston with Principal Group. We're the urban designers, sort of placemakers on the team. Our firm really focuses on helping communities like yours picture their future and then figure out how we can get that vision you come up with into reality. So what we've put together this morning here is really a lot of ideas that we've been kicking around in our office and with the team. And we need your input. And when I say input, I don't mean pleasantries or, oh, that looks nice. I want to know if you hate something or if you love something. So really, I want you to have a conversation with us about the future and what you dream about, and also what you don't want to see. Because what we're trying to do is understand, how can the future of this site fit into Kennebunkport? And how does it become part of this small town character, this sort of charming place that you all live and call home? And I'm not from here. I visited here a few times. I'm familiar with the town, but I don't know it like you all do. And what we need to understand is your knowledge, your local knowledge. What makes this place special, so that we can figure out how to insert those ideas and concepts into this site, so that you all feel in a generation, or with your kids, your grandkids are walking around in this part of the neighborhood, it feels like Kennebunkport. So it's important. This image was striking. I mean, it's from the bridge. It's sort of this kind of iconic part of your town. But what I want you to notice here is you've got a lot of nature. You've got this great access to the main coastline, to the outdoors that Maine is so known for nationally. But what you also see here is you've got very sensitively placed pieces of the human habitat. Us as humans, we need to live somewhere, we need to work someplace, we need to congregate. And you can see these kind of, from left, there's the least sparse, it's the most natural. And then as you get to the right, you see these bits and pieces of life, of town life coming together. And that's our responsibility, is how do we choreograph that as a community so it doesn't disrupt the natural elements that are the real beauty of this part of the coastline. And then you also have the junk. You see the parking lots, the telephone poles, the stuff that communities have that we have to just deal with. So I think this site in particular has a lot of those issues in respect to the water, to the wetlands, and how do we deal with all that and make sure it still feels like a special place. So there's a concept in town planning. Is anyone a designer or an architect or a planner? No, okay, one. So I'm a designer, so a lot of what we need to know is constraints and opportunities, and understand how can we, through looking at patterns, start to bring together a coherent vision with all sorts of minds involved. And the more minds that we get involved, the better the place can become. So what this is showing is a natural transect. This is a concept borrowed from ecology, where you have different ecosystems from ocean to prairie to forest. But several decades ago, the planning community came, well, that natural transect actually needs to extend to integrate into the human habitat, where we settle places, where we live, work, play. So what we've tried to do is understand, well, how do we calibrate the neighborhoods and the intensity of uses, the compact nature of the streets, so that they fit into that natural transect, so that nature is a part of the entire urban form, all the way down to downtown, Main Street, out to the edge of town, and out back into the farmland countryside. So why is this important? There are a lot of communities that have made drastic mistakes that have altered their financial health of their communities for generations. And this is sort of a typical shot that we've seen in New England of the farmland and then sprawl. And we call this sprawl because it's an uncoherent development pattern. It doesn't create place. It just creates roads, houses, and places to store things you can buy. There's no community here, very little community. Now that's not to say that people try hard to create community out of this sprawl, but over the last 50 years, it's been demonstrated both financially as well as from a public health standpoint that this is actually creating a fatter society, a less healthy society. Many communities have financial disruption because of this. So if you think of a different pattern, this pattern that we actually have in New England of creating neighborhoods and creating places where community can congregate, you get a more sustainable, a more resilient community and a place that people will love for generations. And I think that's what you're asking us to do with this site, and why I think you've gone through the process you've gone through to get here, is that you want a place that you can love. So how do you do that is the question. And for us, it's really, this is a typical historical shot of a New England town. And how many folks drive around and see the thickly settled signs? Like, that's unique to New England. It's this idea that things were thickly settled, that we came together around church or around community or around commerce, and we need to look at those patterns again. And those patterns are not dictated by fire trucks, they're not dictated by moving vehicles or delivery trucks, they're dictated by the human form. And that's important for everyone to remember, because it's that idea of bringing people together so they can bump into their neighbors, and they can walk, they can live without the expense of an automobile, that is so important. So we pay a lot of attention to those patterns, and this is a thing that nationally is really being paid attention to now. The Sierra Club is actually endorsing walkable neighborhoods as a direct tool to support a better ecology and a better natural system. You look at Governing Magazine, it's about how do you walk to school. So there's benefits not just from a public life standpoint, but also from the checkbook and from the natural systems of your community. So I was walking around last night, and I'm going to move over here so you all can see now. I feel like I'm blocking a few people. So I was walking around last night, and this might be a very nice, expensive house, but what I see as sort of an outsider is a collection of different building types. And different building types are something that we as planners try to look through, the sort of pattern recognition. So this might be a large house in the front, but it could very easily be 4 apartments or 2 townhouses. And then the structure in the back could have been a carriage house, but it could also be an apartment, or it could be 2 flats. So the idea that this historical building type can actually be many different types of housing, and not just a house, but housing. So why is that important? And in New England, we actually have a lot of patterns, a lot of building types. I'm going to move back so I don't block the video. We have a duplex, townhouses, we have the cottage, we have the live-work. We have all of these different building types that we just have to go back and look at, measure, and then figure out, well, what's the right pattern for this place, for this, the vision that you all want to have for the future. And this is not radical. People, builders, developers, towns have been working on this for 25, 30 years. These are brand new, we've just been working on these. That might look like a large cabin house, but that's actually a 10-unit apartment building. So the idea that we can actually borrow from these patterns and start to build them again. And this is not just a 10-unit apartment building, this was a modular 10-unit apartment building. So it was actually built at a fairly affordable price point. So this is nothing new, and that's what's surprising. Is like if you go back and look at old postcards, old maps, measure your great streets and your great neighborhoods already in town, you start to see these opportunities emerge. And this is, this is something that we knew and had forgotten. In the sort of post-war period, all of these pattern books of house types, house plans, how to put a community together, that was knowledge we all knew. And we're trying to unearth that down here in New England. And I think you all as residents of Kennebunkport know what's great and what's not great. So how can we create those patterns again? And places are doing this. This is a sort of prototypical floor plan, which has the master bedroom down so that it's conducive to aging in place, so that if you can't get up the stairs, you can still stay in your home and age in the community. And it's got a front porch, so it can be close to the street. It still have engaged with your neighbors, but still have a little bit of privacy, so your windows aren't right up on the sidewalk. And it's elevated a few feet, so you have a little bit more privacy, but you can also watch the grandkids run around the front yard. And this is prototypical, but what I mean by prototypical is it doesn't need to look the same everywhere. This is essentially the same floor plan, just with 5 different houses. So that this idea of a building type can be replicated and can be calibrated and adjusted to fit in or to not fit in. And I think it was interesting, there's a few folks who have made comments on these already that let's not have same or duplicative architecture and what really fits in here. So I think this is an important idea to think about. So how does this fit into a community's overall affordability? So that a young person just coming back from college or just coming out of high school can stay in the community, or older folks can age and adjust their lifestyle needs and stay in the community. And what this really means is that we have a section of housing types in the middle that we don't build anymore. We don't build too many townhouses. We don't build any small apartment houses. We don't build any triple deckers. So we're really essentially building predominantly single-family homes and mid-rise apartment buildings, typically that have elevators. You'll see some of those in and around Portland, but the idea of building a 6-unit apartment building is very rare in communities like yours these days. It may be happening, but it's something that's missing. And it's missing not just from a form standpoint, but from an economic standpoint. If you build smaller and you build at these varying scales, you can use construction methods that are more affordable and deliver housing at price points that typically don't get delivered at single-family homes or at mid-rise apartment buildings. So this is really important for you to understand. If one of the goals is to provide housing for a large section of the community in many different price points, you're going to need missing middle housing types. And that's a way to do it, and to do it from a sort of open market standpoint. This is not missing middle housing. This is your kind of starter housing townhouse. It's a monoculture. And this is that idea of sprawl. This is just a very simple thing laid out over the land that over generations people don't come to really value. It doesn't necessarily bring the community as much value from a financial standpoint as it could. So we're more interested in understanding what types of missing middle housing is appropriate for here and appropriate for Kennebunkport. And it could be small cottages, it could be back buildings, it could be small apartments, it could be single-family homes, it could be townhouses. And it's interesting because another way to help with affordability is actually to build a good design in a simple way. So there might be a lot of variety, but in a very narrow range. And what we find is those places start to feel better. They feel more authentic. They age better. And this is a new townhouse, section of townhouses. I think these are in Scarborough. But this can fail. You can have a horrible sort of street space where you have the garage and the car have more to do with this place than the humans. And I think this is part of that sort of simplicity around planning with sprawl and prioritizing the automobile over the creation of front stoops and of community. So we see this all over New England, and especially in the sort of retirement, sort of aging population, where you sort of have these large apartment buildings set back from the road, typically surrounded by parking. And this is not the type of community that I don't think you want, but you need to tell us that. And there is a way to do that that I think is more sympathetic to the goals of this site. And imagine that clad in shingles. Wouldn't that be nice? It's sort of this idea of a place that is within nature and supports nature, but is still connected to town, since I think you're really 10 minutes from where we stand now from a walk. And the other question we're kind of puzzling over, is there a need for a corner store or a small bit of retail, a cafe or something? Is that something that belongs on one of these two streets that this site connects to? And we love your feedback on that. And this is, I think, really important because it's kind of shocking sometimes that we worry about our housing costs and we worry about our community, but what we don't realize is we have these historic places that people all over the country are trying to replicate right now. They are beloved. They are places that have all of these good patterns that support healthy communities. And what we find is they're actually very rare, which is why they're so valuable. So we have the tools to build more of this. I think you just need to help us and help us guide that and then choose those tools. And then you get places that people can age in place, all sections of the community can fit into it and afford to be there. And you have active lifestyles, which I think are so helpful. How many folks walked here today, actually? Good for you. So I think we have a driving problem nationally. We drive everywhere where historically we used to walk a lot. So that helps, with our vitality and all of the other issues around aging. So this is an interesting project that we thought of as Karen and I were talking about kind of the feedback and input we've gotten today. And really this is a project entirely designed around the farm and being within nature. And it has a series of these kind of loop roads, and on the left there is sort of the main street. So you have a restaurant and a coffee shop, and I think artist housing and some affordable units. And then as you drift further and further away to the right of the site, you get more and more larger homes and larger houses. And then what's so interesting is that it has this water course that runs through it, which is similar to the site that we're looking at today. And then on the ground, this is what it looks like. And it's sort of designed, this is in Georgia, so it's a very sort of southern idea of the architecture and the sort of local stone of this part of the state. But it also has smaller homes and smaller cottages, and this is actually a front house and a back house as a smaller affordable unit. So I think this idea of how do we can fit a lot of different things into a very small section of the site. And why do we want to do that? This is something kind of we knew and had forgotten. The fiscal health of a town is actually a lot to do about tax revenue per acre is something we've started to look at, and that's not something that many towns measure. So just keep this in mind, and this is some work that a colleague of ours has done, really helping his hometown of Asheville try to get their sort of local economy going and helping their downtown. So the example here is meant to sort of illustrate this point. So most folks are looking at growth, and a lot of communities choose expansion. They choose sprawl. Let's get more commercial, let's expand out. And you can see when you start to actually measure the tax per acre, it's actually much more effective and much more valuable and productive when you start to look at these historic forms that are much more compact. And what do I mean by compact? That means more dense. That means more thickly settled. So when you have a place that's thickly settled, we're seeing when you start to look at and measure the numbers, even places that are half vacant but have a thickly settled pattern can be more valuable than the Walmart or the large grocery store out on the highway. And what the top cartoon is saying is, in almost a quarter of the land, you can have all of what you want from housing, and you can have a more financially stable place, versus the bottom cartoon, which is really this idea of pods of development that sprawl out in the countryside and don't create productive land and productive value so that your grandkids and your grandkids can still have a viable community. So how do we get there? In 1949, that's how much feet of pipe per person. 2015, it was 1,000% increase. So think about that. We've added so much more cost as a community to how we build housing and how we build our neighborhoods. There's no surprise that we have housing affordability issues, that we have sort of balancing the books of a community is always a challenge. So this, when you really start to look at the numbers, and I would suggest that as a community start to do this and think, how do we make our land in our community more productive? And thickly settled is kind of a way that we've seen this be done in other places. And this is not something that we're creating. This is an old idea, this idea of the 5-minute walk. That you should be able to have access to everything you need, your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, your doctor, your dentist, all within a kind of 5-minute walk. This sort of community unit is this neighborhood. And from center to edge, it's a 5-minute walk. We've forgotten that. It's interesting, when we do these maps, I'll show you one in a second, in New England, you can sort of do a 5-minute walk. It's amazing that pattern, that sort of history on the land in New England is there. It's just we've kind of forgotten it. And then when you have a 5-minute walk and then you start to connect it with a network of streets, and kids know this, they kind of inherently say, I'm going to take the shortcut because the street is less crowded or it's less busy. Like, we don't build shortcuts anymore. We don't have this network. We kind of build a cul-de-sac, and then we complain about the traffic. Well, you're creating bottlenecks when you don't have a network. You don't create shortcuts for your kids or your grandkids to get around. So I think the idea of having a road that connects through the site, it might create. Can we make that be a shortcut? Can we create that be a safe place to connect two parts of the community that are not connected now? So here's what I mean by 5-minute walk. That's a 5-minute walk from the center of town, what I would consider sort of the main street. Here we are. Then there's the next 5-minute walk is actually centered on the school. So it was a 10-minute walk from downtown. So the kids historically could go downtown in a 10-minute walk. Well, then if you go out again, you have another 5-minute walk, which actually lands smack dab in the center of where our site connects. And then as you kind of walk further out, you have another sort of neighborhood there, and then a third neighborhood where we hit School Street again. So these traces on the land are really important. It makes sense in New England. We didn't have cars when we laid out all our streets. So other places are building streets like this now. They're building streets that are connected to nature, that you have a view to the countryside, but you can also get a coffee or go to the drugstore and all. And then you have different types of buildings, apartments, larger homes, townhouses, all within this kind of walking environment. So walking is a lot about street safety. And a lot of places are having a huge movement to slow their streets. And just riding, the B&B I'm at has a bicycle, and I borrowed it yesterday, I've been riding around, I rode over this morning. And you have some areas that your streets move really slowly, but then you have some areas where people just hit the pedal and go. And this is important that throughout town, 20 miles per hour, 25 miles per hour is plenty. People might add 30 seconds, a minute to their trip to get from one side of downtown to the other. But the reality is, every mile per hour you go over 25 is the closer and closer you get to having a kid killed when they get hit by a car. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to walk away from a hit when you're at 20, 25 miles per hour. When you get to 45, 9 out of 10 people are going to be killed. So this is really important. So how do you do that? You make streets that look like this. Charming, compact, thickly settled streets. And they're the types of streets that you feel comfortable walking right down the center of. How many people have done that in town? Is there a street you walk down the center of? Yeah, so I want to know where those are, because those are the places that are safe, and you feel value there, you feel warmth, that sort of quality of community that I think we want to replicate. And there's these other goofy streets. We call these streets, but you might not think of them as streets, but these are places that connect. They're paths that have grass, there's these walking paths that connects homes that don't have cars on them. And then there's these places in New England that have what the DPW guys might just throw their hands up and say it's never possible, but oyster shells or gravel, like these are things we used to build places with in New England. Why? Because they were effective and they were cheap, and they allowed us to build and be able to keep the community close. When we build a road now that has gutters, underground stormwater, 14 feet clear for the fire truck, 12-foot travel lanes, you get all this infrastructure that's costly, and you get fast-moving streets that have the potential to kill kids or kill adults. So this is an important pattern to keep in mind, because it's not this. This is what a lot of the standards creates nowadays. Big turns, wide pavement, expensive parking lots, in places where people are scared to walk. So there are other ways to do this. This is a project in Oklahoma. It's a project that is building all sorts of streets. And they're building small houses, big houses, back houses, all of these different types of buildings. And they're connecting it to nature. And they're bringing in nature into the project so that you have these places to congregate and to bring the community together. And they're building streets like this. Who would have thought of a boardwalk? And I thought it was interesting that one side of the bridge has a wood sidewalk, which is this traditionally kind of lost. And then you get these, this might be laid out as a boardwalk, but in reality, this is a place to have community congregate, to come together, to enjoy that space. So I think we should inspire, in whatever kind of streets or lanes go into this part of town, to make them be places that people can celebrate and really enjoy spending time in. And we have to think, this is going to be a challenge with this site, is how can we connect in more places than just two? How can we help create a network so that there's more shortcuts? And that's not, I think we should think about that. I don't know what opportunities are there, but it would, I think, really help in that area of town. The idea that, right now when you do traffic engineering, you kind of have a point A to point B. You have one option on the left side. Well, on the right side, from point C to point D, you have a lot of options. So it's this idea that dispersing traffic, because we have cars. Everyone drove here today, except this guy. Where was he? Right here.
Bicycle.
Yeah, bicycle. There we go. I rode my bike too. So we've got to deal with cars. But the reality is, by having a network, we can have more choices. And choices are great. Everyone likes choices because you can get around stuff. You can take shortcuts. So I think that one street, the question I keep asking is, are there more streets? Are there more places to connect? Is it a little tiny path? Is it a lane? What is it? Because that might help the whole community by giving shortcuts. And why do we want this? Well, because we have people live in Kennebunkport, and they might want to go out into the woods, or they might want to connect to the community, and they want to take a different way. And this cartoon is kind of showing that the countryside needs to come all the way into the center of town. And you need to have these walkable places, these little orange dots of life that are built around this 5-minute walk. And that's how our New England sort of urbanism, our New England countrysides, and some of those were church steeples, some of those were corner stores, some of those were farmers markets. But the idea that the countryside is actually more of a part of New England's heritage than the small towns. How can we start to think about how this site is at the edge of town and coming into town? And I think that's an interesting puzzle for us. And how can it change as you go from one side to the other, and shape places that people might use to congregate, or might use to celebrate and really have different types of events. And these tiny spaces, and some of these spaces I think might actually need to be productive. They might need to, when we think of sustainability today, a lot of folks are talking about food security as well. So you have a food shed, where does your food come from? But when you think about sustainability, it's not just water and energy, it's about how the community comes together and thinks about sustainability themselves, and how they help move that forward. Because any solar guideline in a zoning document or requirement is not going to do it unless the community knows and wants to put them up. So sustainability is a lot about placemaking as it is about the technology and the smart design. And it's about getting folks involved in the idea of how do you be more sustainable. And the idea of designing this part of the community as a thickly settled place that has productive land value and provides housing for all, and then can also be sustainable is an interesting idea that I think we should challenge ourselves for. And there are projects that are doing this. This is Serenbe in Georgia, where it's all about how these collection of neighborhoods can be this sort of necklace of places through the countryside, through the farms, they actually have pastures and grazing, and then through the forest. And I think this is an interesting thing to think about this site because of the proximity to downtown, but also the idea of how do we integrate countryside and the woods into this section of Kennebunkport. And the idea of how do you create places is a lot about how you bring people together. How do you create spontaneity? How do you bring people, they can feel like they own a part of the neighborhood and can sit there and be comfortable. And this is literally 3 blocks from my office in Boston. That thing you see in the back is a mural that is a really horrible pedestrian bridge over the railroad corridor. And the minute that they started to think about that as a canvas and with some very cheap chairs from Home Depot, it gave people the little bit of tools they needed to say, hey, this is actually a beautiful place where you can spend time, rather than a back alley, near the edge of the railroad. So us as humans are really communal species. We like to be together. The idea that, look at this park on the left. There's no one in the front of the park, but everyone's like congregating near each other in the back. This idea that just some stones can create a place for kids to play, a place for people to be. And I think it's such a challenge here in New England for us is how do we bring these places together and provide all sorts of opportunity for community to be created and be supported, both in the summer and in the winter, and for everyone in the community. I think that's sort of an aspiration we always want to embed in the work we do, and I hope you share that value. So what are we going to do now? I hope that gives you a lot of sort of food for thought. It really was meant to sort of hopefully spark some ideas and discussion topics. So I'm going to have Kara come up and talk to you about what we're doing next and why we actually brought you all here on a Saturday morning in a beautiful summer weekend. So we do appreciate all this, and what I need from you now is you to help us co-design this place. We really need your thoughts, your ideas, your local knowledge to help craft a great plan for this park in Kennebunkport. So here's Kara.
Your lights. Thanks for coming, everybody. So we're going to do a series of activities. The first one, a lot of you have already jumped into, but we have 20 minutes to continue to look at these images at the front. Basically, it's a visual preference survey. It's a great way for you to look at a variety of different ideas and give us your feedback on what you like or don't like about these images. And the more specific you can be, the more helpful it is for us to really understand that nuance. And then, and just one thing about this, you'll notice some numbers on the stickers, and you can just ignore those. Those are sort of a notation referring to some of the comments we had at the last session, because that was confusing to some people. And then after that, we're going to do some mapping back at tables. So I'll get back up here and go through the instructions on that after this first 20 minutes. So you don't have to remember everything that's going on. But we're going to do the mapping exercise for 30 minutes, and then another 20 minutes on some detailed mapping. And then we're going to share that input from each of the tables, so you guys can all hear from each other what you are thinking about the site. And then we have one more quick exercise that is just going to be a final brainstorm. So that's sort of the overview. Does anyone have any questions about the visual preference survey before we get?
So anything you put online on Facebook will also go to the same mix?
Yeah, so if you've responded on Facebook and you feel like you've said your piece, that's fine. We're paying attention, and the response on Facebook has been incredible. If anyone wants to go look at those images later and chime in there too, that's fine. Any other questions? Yep. Yeah, so the question was, as far as wetlands are concerned, are they delineated on the map? And the answer is yes, and we can go into more detail on the maps when we get back to the table. So with that, let's do the 20 minutes of the visual preference survey. People can just come up and grab markers and stickers. So the next work exercise is looking at the maps you have in front of you. So there's two maps. One is more zoomed out and one is more zoomed in, closer to the parcel. So we're going to start with the more zoomed out map. And on your instructions, number 2 is where you'll look for the first map. It's a series of questions to help you think through some opportunities related to where you might like to see buildings, where you want to see the natural areas stay as they are, or different kinds of open space, mobility questions, and some questions related to municipal services.
Can you clarify the map?
Clarify. Yep. So there's, once again, there's 2 maps. Yeah, they're 2 different scales. We're going to start with the one that's zoomed out. So it's the, this one here. The parcel is outlined in a dashed black line. And so it's the one that shows more surrounding context. And some of the questions are related to connections, so it will allow you to kind of see the surrounding area and understand where this is in relationship to the community. So as a table, you can go through the questions and put down as many ideas or thoughts as you have on the map using the markers that are on your table. And if you're talking about something and you're not writing it down, we're not going to get that information. So please write down as much as you can. And you don't necessarily all have to agree, but having a conversation with your group to kind of talk through some of the potential issues that you're discussing is helpful to kind of go through that process to see if you can come to a point where you guys can agree. But you can also agree to disagree. So just as many ideas on the map as possible is really helpful, so you can draw or you can notate or both. And then the second part is switching over to the other map, and I'll just tell you about that now so people can kind of work at their own pace. The second map is more zoomed in, and the instructions for that are number 3 on the back side of the instruction sheet. And you'll see on your table there's 4 sheets that look like this. And so these are trying to get into this conversation about a little more about where you want what kinds of patterns to happen on this site. And so when you go to the zoomed in map, you can draw where you want to see each of these different kinds of characters. And then any place where you've marked that you'd like to see buildings or one of those different kinds of characters that contain buildings, there's also these building types. And Russ talked a little bit about building types in the presentation, but there's a range from small house to house, small apartment building, and these are just, really to try to understand in a little more detail what you guys are thinking. There's shop house, which, the implication there is that you're wanting to see a little bit of retail somewhere, so that helps us to understand. So So it's both related to the size, scale of the buildings, the number of units, and the uses. So if anyone has any questions, oh, and sorry, if you can notate on the map too where you want to see these different types, that would be helpful. And you can also write on these sheets to let us know what you like or don't like about the concepts you see here. Any questions? Yes.
So this presumes that you want to start with, should we have development?
Yes, yeah. The question is, should we presume that we want to have development? And the answer is not necessarily. I mean, one of these is rural. So if that's the type of character you want to see everywhere, then you would write that. If you want to see this, you would write that. So there's no assumptions here. This is why we're asking you what you want to see where.
And my second question is there a difference in the impact of the cost of this project of the different things that obviously the rural, if you went do nothing, it's cost us $10 million. If you want to do affordable housing, it's going to cost you another $5 million. I don't know, is there some kind of threshold for what these do? I mean, it's hard to say, yes, I want this, if we have no idea the economic benefit.
So the question relates to the balance between the cost of the site and the potential for different scenarios to be able to recoup that cost.
Need one meeting.
Sorry. Does everyone want to listen to these questions and answers for just one more minute, and then we'll break down into the group? So the question is just related to how to make decisions on where to put stuff and what to put stuff if you don't understand the cost implications. And I would say at this point, you know, it's really looking at the balance of what you'd like to see and the goals. And we're going to dig into the numbers more, and we're coming back on Monday so we can talk more about the numbers and what those look like. Get right to it.
Okay. Our table felt a few things were important. Number one, we don't think there's a need for any commercial building or any retail building. We also, secondly, don't think that this is the place for a new firehouse or a new town hall. We'd like to see lots of open space, lots of natural habitat for the wildlife and for people to enjoy. I think that means like walking and biking trails. In fact, on the road, instead of having the paved sidewalk near the road, you could minimize the impact of the road by having lots of walking and biking trails that are dirt or gravel, much like the bridle path in Kennebunk. On the road, we were concerned that there would not be, that if it's a cut through for people to walk on or bike on, that's great. If people are going too fast, or if it's tour buses start using it, or big trucks, we're concerned about that. So a way to try and prevent that from happening. And also as part of the road, making sure there's buffering for the neighborhoods that are very close to the road. And then I think the fifth point was in terms of the housing, I think we'd like to see it all go back to nature, but recognizing that that's not entirely realistic. If we could have housing that is built such that it encourages young families to move in, year-round residents, affordable housing, depending on how that's defined different ways, but I think our table is defining it as a way that we can bring in young families into the community. And to the extent that we can encourage the building of those homes to be sustainable, whether it's solar or LEED type buildings, whether good insulation, that sort of thing. And did I forget anything?
What are you doing at streetlights?
Oh, we also did talk about streetlights, and just make sure that they're they're directed down in low light so that we're not creating more light pollution than necessary while still keeping it safe. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
But I guess we had a robust discussion about a lot of things, but we did not necessarily agree on everything. But I think that the sort of the key points were, one, seeing what we could do to basically ignore the wetlands. In other words, do whatever we can to have compensating wetlands somewhere else, but this becomes a much bigger development site as a result. Also, I think we were keen to see that there's some exploration made with landowner down here and up here, because that again would improve connectivity to the site and access into town. Let me see, what else? I think we feel that this has an opportunity, if we are able to do something right here, to create more of a village concept, a traditional village, where we could have clustered housing, housing that's a little more dense, and thereby creating an opportunity to preserve more open space on around the perimeter. We definitely believe that this site, this leg here and this leg here should be restricted simply to road access in no development. As far as open space is concerned, one idea might be to do the first couple of development sites and then let the trails sort of emerge organically. There's, in fact, a case study at the University of Oregon called the Oregon Experiment, where the campus was built with no paths, and the paths just emerged over time. And that was the travel path people wanted to follow. So that's a concept that might be used here, but I do realize, and we all realize at our table, that bike access, bike paths, and pedestrian paths are one thing most people seem to be able to agree on. And so we may not want to wait too long before those are actually put in place. Did I miss anything? Okay. Thank you.
Fiscally responsible. That's most important. We spend $10 million for the land. Let's make sure that whatever we spend in that area to develop right is responsible for the taxpayers, so it's got good use and it has good benefit for everybody long term. We believe that it should be more open green space and preserve the ecosystem, which is really important for our area to maintain the character of the town. Safety on North Street is really important, because at least as you go by Reed Lane, there's like a little lip. You can't see the cars coming. People cross that road all the time. It's not really enforced by the police department. That's an accident waiting to happen. We're going to add more traffic. So figuring out a way to have the right enforcement and making sure the traffic flows are right become incredible, because you're going to increase traffic on that street. Buffer zones for homes that are parallel to the road on North Street, so that those that are really close to the road make sure they have some privacy. At least in the Wallace Woods area, there's a lot of homes in that development that they are almost 25 feet right where the road is. So we want to make sure for all homes that abut, they have a good sort of green space and way to protect, their backyard and their family living environment. We're not big fans of commercial buildings or municipal buildings, and we think that if affordable housing is done appropriately, so that we can take care of all our civil servants and teachers and fire department people and police, that's really important. But it's got to be done with character that fits the Kennebunkport style and the environment, and it has to be a living space that makes it exciting and interesting for the people who live there. So they're not confined, they don't feel like they've sort of been clustered in a way where it's not really a community, it's more a confined area for them to live. Overall we know that the $10 million that was spent, we want to make sure we get a good payback on that, but more importantly, keep the character of Kennebunkport alive and well and do as much green space as possible, because that's just great for the ecosystem and for all of us, not just for today, but long term. Thanks.
So I've heard a lot of really good things. Some are similar to what we had in mind, and I've got a few things that are a little different. So we talked a lot. We went through all the exercises. We really threw a lot on the map. But we came up with at least 50-50 open space and some residential media. One of the big important things that came out of our discussion was that it's really hard for young families to find affordable housing in this area. And the concern is that eventually there won't be enough students to come into a school like this because it's declining. So trying to make it a little bit more affordable for families that are coming into town, that are working in this, in the port or around to live in this area. Was one of the items that we talked about. but again, we want to make sure that it's done the right way to maintain the charm of Kennebunkport and match kind of up with some of the other things that are around. So, and again, we didn't think a lot about commercial because we wanted to make sure that everything was funneled back to the existing areas like Cape Porpoise or to the port, rather than creating more, commercial things for people to go to. So, we also talked about having everything very walkable. If we were to create that road across, we want to make sure it's walkable and at a slower speed to maintain the ability for people to walk to their schools through the north, and then also potentially a path across what is someone else's property, I think, but the Bush family had been using it to land, I guess, a helicopter. So maybe there's negotiability there to create some kind of path to the school, so that if they do have children and their younger families might be able to get across without having to drive. So, anything else I forgot? Safety was a big thing, and I think we like the fact that there's obviously open water and ponds and things like that could be the open spaces. And then one idea was a community garden, as well as potentially another playground. I think the only other playground in actual Kennebunkport is over by the highway building, which you can go find it, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's kind of out there a little bit. So I want to make it a little more approachable for families to go to. So anything else? Other than obviously there's a great area outside the building too, but besides that. Okay, great, thank you.
So there's definitely some common themes that are emerging here, and a lot of overlap, but I will go through our 5 bullet points. The first thing is that we agree the idea of exploring an easement that would allow that area to be connected essentially with this area. It makes a lot of sense, either through the private land or perhaps a little bit further to the edge through the Conservation Trust area. We think not a road, but something that would be a walking, biking, skiing type of path. And that would connect in with what we see as a recreational path that would go across both the length and interwoven through and around the wetlands areas that would be exclusively for biking, walking, skiing. To the greatest degree possible, not overlapping the road, keeping the road and car traffic separate from the ability to walk. We think that would be a natural connector of the neighborhoods that would develop. We would like to see clusters of housing. We didn't talk about how many, but the houses would be clustered and multi-generational, not segregated by age. And we agree that we prefer not to see commercial development. We think that it acts as an attractor of traffic and it competes for the open space. So we think we have enough commercial in the area, but we want to tie this development in so that they have access to the existing commercial areas. One of the things we haven't talked about was we spoke a lot about what we want the look and feel of the housing to be like, but I think we do want to emphasize that it needs to be green development, and I think that ties in with some of the state initiatives right now for solar. We haven't talked about whether the utilities would be buried or not, but wouldn't that be nice if the utilities could be buried and it would be tied in with a theme of energy efficient design.
We talked a lot about housing here, and I want to make a couple of points. The presentation that was made dealt primarily with housing, and this particular piece of land has no housing on it, and I think it should be restricted. We all think it should be restricted to some extent. The presenter did not seem to understand that along with many different types of housing, there are many different types of nature. There's nature that's open space, there are wetlands, there are forests, wetlands. There are large, large tracts of land that attract certain types of wildlife and flora and fauna and not other types. If you divide a piece of forest up into cluster houses and put trees around it, it's not the same as having a forest, and you will get different flora and fauna. I would also point out that when you're making maps, you ought to be able to spell Kennebunkport correctly. We felt that there should be no development at all along North Street, for sure. One of the things that I know as a Shade Tree Committee member is that the town owns 12 forest parcels in addition to this particular tract, which they've just gotten, which is the largest tract. All of those parcels are fairly inaccessible for anybody walking. In fact, some of them we're not even sure we have the easements to go into it. So this is a very important tract of land to the town. I'm very glad they bought it. As I said, there should be no development along North Street because the traffic there is horrendous and it's getting very dangerous along there. It is a major route into Dock Square. In the summer, the traffic backs up to Lock Street and further. And it makes it very difficult for the residents there to get in and out of their driveways. I've heard this complaint. Makes it difficult to get to the post office, the town office. If you want to put in affordable housing, and I hope that's housing that cannot be bought up and rented out, you have to have a way to do that, to be able to keep small families here. It should be on the School Street side. You could take 10 to 20 acres and easily put in your cluster housing, small housings that are affordable to police, firemen, people who work in town. School Street probably gets about 1/20th of the traffic that North Street gets and can handle it. Plus the school is on that side, so that helps a lot. There should be no municipal buildings in there unless they're an absolute necessity. We do need a new town hall, that's okay. Maybe you want to put a town hall in there and a meeting place, but really you don't need big community buildings. You don't need playgrounds. Playgrounds are not the same as open space. They're pretty much sterile. You want teaching tools. As a member of the Shade Tree Committee, again, I've talked to the Board of Selectmen. The committee has come forward about taking and making the town basically into an arboretum and extending this arboretum, are we working it? Extending the arboretum right into this parcel of land. So you can use it as a teaching tool, not only for school children, but people who are moving in from the suburbs who don't understand a lot about Maine natural landscapes. Thank you. The wetlands are extremely important. You cannot build on them, and that's a good thing because wetlands are a carbon source for the sea. Your salt marshes and your wetlands, and they're very unique, again, in their flora and fauna. And they need to be preserved, especially forest wetlands. They are great teaching tools. People who want to enjoy nature go out into the forest. They call it forest bathing now. And, you know, and they get away from things like bicycle paths. You can have your bicycle paths, but keep them away from walking paths. I mean, you have your road through, you can make the bicycle path along there. If they want a more challenging path, the bicyclists, you can put a more challenging path in there. But bicycling through a forest is not the same as walking through a forest. So you have to be careful how you put this plan together. Frankly, we all feel that as much of this should be preserved and not developed until we've seen a little more about what the future of Kennebunkport is becoming. And to keep this very valuable parcel in reserve so that we have something to meet the future needs of Kennebunkport.
We're going to hold up on that. I'm George Lopez. It looks like we developed the entire parcel, but we really didn't. The two places we focused on primarily was the segment of land that goes out on School Street and then immediately right along North Street. It seems that there's an area in here that can be used for affordable housing, relatively high density, and if you don't know the housing trust, please look at the parameters of that because they have really good standards for how buildings can be developed on land nice thing about that being contiguous to School Street is the proximity to here. For people who grew up here and have had their kids go through school here, this has always been the heart of the community. And the great fear of losing this school and losing that piece of the community is to a lot of people horrifying. So this seemed like a good place to look at that. There's a few parcels along here. There's been back and forth on any sort of commercial development, the idea of a coffee house or something like that. If there were something like that, I know there's a lot of traffic on North Street. Maybe the speed limit changes back down to 25 in here. We were looking at this municipal parcel until we remembered it's the cemetery. There's a small piece here as well, but trying to maintain the development out on the periphery, keeping as much open space as possible. The orange spots were places that we thought in the future, years out from here, people could look at that if they needed to build a place or wanted to build a place with some cluster housing. Then those would be spots we could do it, but primarily maintaining all of the wetlands that we can, the green areas being park areas that can be used as buffers in addition to what's pointed out by the wetland areas. So in summary, initially for any development out on the edges, and then in the future considering where things might be used.
That sums it up.
Okay.
I'm Mike Weston. Our group had a little bit of a different discussion. We were trying to look at this from a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, whatever, how many years out that you want to look at. So we decided to recommend that the first things that we should look at is a combination of affordable housing, senior housing together, so we can get multi-age groups together, or people together, families. We also think that town hall would be appropriate, and a community garden, along with the appropriate trails, walking paths, etc., and a lot of preserved areas. So what we did on our map was we indicated a lot of the open areas, and one of them, of course, is we looked at the North Street side, and it sort of looked like there's not much you can do there, so maybe that'll be a quiet area. Like somebody has already recommended, but basically that's everything that we talked about. And which, oh no, we didn't do the Irving station, right? No. Yeah. The combined community and room meeting area along with the town hall, so we had some place where we can have meetings, other than the gym here. That was one. And did I miss anything else? So we have a map. We put a lot in here for the future, and we put a lot in here for preserved lands. We're not trying to define it. We figure that's going to happen as we go along. But it's all there, so. I said the community garden. Well, we said community garden across from the town hall. Excuse me, along with rest areas and, oh yeah, orchards. We're talking about orchards and so forth. So anyway, it was fun. And I think that we're all on the same wavelength, which is great.
All right, so we had a lot of great discussion here. You know, a lot of it was also, I think, community-based. You know, I think you know, we've heard some we had some discussion just about what the demographic of the town, what's happening here, you know, and how we might see this property being able to, you know, help redefine that. But similar to a lot of your all's conversations, you know, we started to draw in some buffering to adjacent developed properties, but also keeping in mind that, you know, those buffered areas might have a trail within them. We kind of drew out where the CMP easement was, you know, the CMP easement maybe being a great opportunity to have a connection right back down to the school in terms of having that as a pedestrian access point. We like the idea of having, you know, of having affordable housing that was close to maybe a village green common area, good congregating space for folks, not too dissimilar to the village green that we have off of Ocean Avenue, playground space, but also, having senior housing that's in close proximity, to your affordable housing as well. We also threw in the idea of having some more defined areas for solar as well. The idea of having some space dedicated for a solar farm was important. Having a connection over to Foxbury Woods, we showed that on the plan. Whether that be future sewer easement for them, but maybe also thinking of that as a possible future pedestrian access down and through there. Again, so very similar thoughts and concepts to what many folks have been talking about. Thank you.
One of the concerns that I've not heard as yet this morning is traffic flow. And my concern is if we have a road that goes from North Street to School Street, that would be a good shortcut for lots of folks. And I'm not sure if we want that to be the way to go through a residential area.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Brigetti. I live on Main Street, right across from the mainstay, and so pretty close by. Our table was actually pretty surprised to hear that there was any talk about development or housing in here. The sense was that this would be a wonderful green space for the town and possibly community use for the town. And one of the major concerns raised about having residential space here is that there is a huge problem in this town with people who do not live in Maine, much less Kennebunkport, buying houses and renting them out seasonally. And the town has done very little to stop that. So the town has really shown a commitment to the tourist trade and not so much to the families. And one of our concerns about houses there was that that's what would happen, is that people from away would buy those homes and that lovely little community that was presented, and it would all be rentals. So that's a concern at our table. And also another major concern is that we don't really know, we're not getting a really clear understanding from the town as to what the real direction of the town is. What do we really want to be as a town? Do we really want senior housing? Do we really want affordable housing? We're getting a lot of opinions, but we're not getting real direction from the town on that. So part of what we discussed was the idea of saving a large part of this parcel for future use, when we understand a little bit more about what the direction of this town really is and what we really want to be as a town. And that also fulfilled a lot of desire at our table to have this be green space and to have this be walking trails and biking trails. There was also some talk of this idea that a road through there would not be a great idea for a number of different reasons, but what about a dirt road that was bikeable and walkable? So that children and townspeople who want to ride their bikes to town but don't want to brave those roads around there can ride through and then be on the sidewalks, or at least in a slower area of town as people are traveling more slowly. So some of the other ideas around green space here were, the dirt road, definitely the idea of gardens, community gardens, vegetable gardens, a bee and butterfly garden. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could set up a little sanctuary for the bees? This is an issue that's all over the world right now, that our bee population is declining. Bee and butterfly garden with bee houses would be a wonderful teaching opportunity, be wonderful PR for the town. People could wander through the flower garden. The idea also was raised that this would be a great opportunity for the community to offer more to both the people who live here as well as tourists. So having something like the Waterhouse Center, where we can skate, where we can have craft fairs, where we can have farmers markets, where we can have pickleball and other types of covered sporting, would you call that a sport? Other types of active events, let's put it that way. A place for our kids to skate in the winter, maybe a little fire pit. It would be wonderful to have a place where our teens could gather under some type of supervision. Perhaps the rec department could provide some supervision and a small building for teens to come together with some type of support from the community. Prelude events could be held there, Kennebunkport Festival events. It would be very nice to have that type of a center that the town could support, as well as some of the local businesses could support. We did not feel that we needed municipal buildings in there at this time. I think our table was mostly about no development. Did I miss anything at all? Okay, thanks so much.
I'm Rebecca Young. I'm sorry to be last. We're almost there. Our table had some healthy disagreement, let's say, but some nice conversation around what we might like to see on the property. We appreciated the presentation this morning about design, particularly from the historical perspective it provided, as well as some of the concerns brought up about sustainability and financial perspectives. So based on that, we came to a little bit of a consensus, and correct me if I'm wrong, on what we would like to see overall. We are a little bit of a biased group, as most of us live very close to the property, so I'll disclose that. But overall, we would like to see a balance of preserving as much natural space as possible, while also providing what we may need as a town in terms of permanent housing to bring in those young families and to support our local schools. So we'd like to see as much of the green space preserved, which, connected to the presentation, we agreed that the thickly settled approach to this would be the best idea in terms of being able to save some of that land for later development as needs arise, but also to preserve the natural space for the wildlife and possibly some educational opportunities for our kids to learn about the natural environment here in our area. So to that end, we had discussed having, again, like a lot of you have said already, the walking trails throughout. We see this as not only a way to preserve the natural landscape, but also possibly as an educational opportunity in terms of our wetlands. That's a unique feature on the property. We also see it as a way of connecting some of the communities surrounding the land, so we'd like that as something, whatever development happens, that those stay in place. In terms of development on the property, as I said, we're looking at the thickly settled approach with a mix of different housing. It's very important to us that that housing, however it looks, maintain the charm, but also be permanent. We prefer not to see any rentals, as many of you have suggested. Sort of getting closer to North Street, we thought it would be nice to have a very small community center that might support a coffee shop for residents as a way to support the idea of a neighborhood and bringing people together. We also like the idea to that end of having a community garden centered in that larger open space where everybody can have a little plot of land to grow some vegetables and fruits and things like that. I love, we didn't discuss this, but the bee and butterfly garden idea, I love that. Portland has some nice visuals for that that we could model after, again, to support what's going on. Sorry, trying to do that. We, as a group, agreed that we prefer it not to be the road that's there not to be a thoroughfare or a shortcut. We understand the value of that in terms of the traffic. If it does become that, we just want to make sure it's a very slow speed, as discussed. Let's see. I think in terms of the housing, we'd like to see as much data as possible be brought in before we make any concrete decisions about that, in terms of who is looking to come live here, and are there jobs to support those people who are coming, before we make any decisions. We threw that in, I hope that's okay. And then there was also a suggestion to have, to support some of the people who are coming in on RVs who would like to eat at our local restaurants and shop at our stores, to provide potentially some parking for those folks. Is that fair? Have I forgotten anything? Okay, thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you guys so much. It was a lot of really great ideas that you said. So before we depart, we're pretty much right on schedule. We just have one final activity. If you have any other burning ideas, creative ideas, we have an idea wall over here, and there's blank pieces of paper on your table, so feel free to jot anything else down. and hang it up on before you leave. As far as the surveys, we can collect those either in here or at the table that you registered at. And any other questions about anything? Yes, thank you. So the rest of the process here. So we're going to be moving after this meeting over to the design studio, which is the Village Fire Station meeting room, which is where we'll be for the next 2.5 days. Basically from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. every day, today, tomorrow, and Monday. So feel free to come by anytime to sort of see where we're at in terms of sketches, drawing, and if you have any other ideas that pop into your head that you want to share. And you can also encourage people who weren't able to come to this to go there and talk to us. And then the other big gathering is going to be Monday, 6, in that room. We're going to have a pin-up where we're going to hang up everything we've done up to that point so we can get more input from you to see if we're kind of on the right track. We're going to gather that and then kind of go home, continue working based on what we've heard from you, and we're going to come back and get together again and do another presentation. So that is the rest of the schedule.
One quick for the design part. Is your goal to come up with a consensus one plan, or are you coming up with various?
For Monday, we'll have a number of different scenarios that you guys can respond to. Any other questions? So the question is, will the ideas presented on Monday be available? Yes, we'll put them on Facebook and on the website, so you can check them out there as well. Any other questions? No? Okay, well thank you guys so much. This is really great. Thanks for coming out on a Saturday morning. Appreciate it.